I was researching to do the interview, and I realized that you spent like 2, 3, 4 years in every job you've had. When are you leaving Semafor?
My tenure is getting longer.
All right, so we're going to start.
Okay, sounds good.
From Columbia Journalism School in New York City, this is Juan Manuel Benitez Wants to Know. My guest today has been one of the main architects of digital news over the last 20 years. He helped build Politico, turned BuzzFeed into a serious news operation, wrote a media column for the New York Times, and now he's a co-founder and editor-in-chief of Semafor. He's also my colleague on the New York editorial board, and he also has a podcast, Mixed Signals. Ben Smith, welcome.
Thanks, Juan Manuel. Thanks for plugging my podcast. That's what it's all about these days.
Of course. You've said in different ways that Semafor is your answer to the chaos in the information world. For someone who has no idea what you do, what problem are you trying to fix?
I think if you ask really almost anyone, certainly me personally, the two things that as a consumer drive people most crazy about media right now are, first of all, just the information overload, the enormous amount of stuff headed your way, the impossibility of kind of going in there and figuring out what's trustworthy, what's great, and what's just noise on one hand. And then the challenge of figuring out who to trust and how to sort of signal trust. Those are the sort of challenges we built Semafor around. The first one, which is in some sense an old internet value that went out of fashion, is that we really do put a lot of energy into finding the most brilliant, most interesting, diverse perspectives on key stories, and pulling them together in this newsletter called Flagship that we send every morning, and then really across all of our products. And we build our original reporting around the trusted voices of expert individual journalists who kind of don't hide their views. We break up our articles into a fact section, and then here's a section that is the reporter's view. And he can state that clearly because everybody knows that journalism's coming to you from human beings who have some at least analytical take on what they're writing about. And I think readers find it kind of refreshing just to be straightforward about that.
So what is a reader getting from Semafor that they cannot get from the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times?
Two things. I mean, one is this transparency around the voices of our journalists. And the second, and it's funny that this has gone out of fashion, but that if you subscribe to a New York Times email, say, it will send you the 17 best New York Times articles that day. But of course, nobody thinks the 17 best articles published that day are from the New York Times. And no reader only wants to read one publication anymore. And I think the thing is that the kind of collapse of the internet and the chaos of the internet has allowed a lot of publishers to say, like, thank God that era is over. We hated it. It was bad for our business. We're going to retreat back into our apps where you can just read only our stories. We'll have it'll be like the good old days with newspapers when you only got one or two based on where you lived and where the printing press was. But I don't think readers want that. I think people actually still want to have different perspectives on the same stories, want great American journalism, and also want perspectives from around the world, and want somebody to help them filter that. And that's something you don't get in these publications.
And how are you going to measure success for a startup like Semafor?
We're building an audience, and we care a lot about that. I think we just passed 1 million subscriptions across our newsletters. And we're not starting as a kind of trying to reach a mass audience and a la Facebook or BuzzFeed in its day. We're trying to reach people, specifically people who are at the tops of businesses and of governments, and in some sense, can't afford to be lied to, can't view news as entertainment, need to make judgments based on it.
And you were there for the rise of Politico, BuzzFeed era, also the virality, the Facebook years of news. Do you feel that you helped fix the news ecosystem? You helped to break it? And what is the new role that you're trying to perform in this new ecosystem?
I mean, I guess I think I have always seen the job of journalism is responding to what the audience wants and to what readers want, not by telling them what they want to hear, but by delivering what the technology of media, which has been changing, allows you to do at the highest quality. I think actually your question in a way reveals this mistake that we all make. And I think most of conversation about media right now is kind of like, all right, like who screwed this up? Who broke it? Whose fault is it? Was it the idiots on the business side who didn't put up a paywall fast enough, or the idiots on the journalism side who screwed up the coverage of the 2004 presidential campaign at CBS News, what was the sort of the original sin for, on one hand, the collapse of the business of particularly metro newspapers, and then on the other hand, the collapse in trust. And I think that's just kind of obviously the wrong way to look at it. This is just basically a story about technology and the media that a lot of us are often nostalgic for, although maybe more nostalgic than it deserves, in the 20th century, where you had these sort of trusted central television networks, three of them, and then each town maybe had one or two, three, if you're in New York, maybe seven newspapers, but a limited number. That was a product of technology. Building a broadcast tower is incredibly expensive, and have printing presses that can and distribution networks to deliver hundreds of thousands of essentially books every day. It's it's a daily miracle, but it's also incredibly expensive industrial operation. And just because these were big, expensive pieces of equipment and factories, you couldn't, only very well capitalized companies could have them. And there was only a few and only so much space in the spectrum. And so as a result, you had this very limited, very centralized business and kind of journalism. I mean, and I think it's so obvious that it kind of goes without saying, but I wish people would sort of say it more. The rise first of cable and then of the internet, of the real internet, just destroyed that. And we're not going to go back to it because the technology has changed. And we have to build a kind of media and journalism that are adapted to this technological moment. And the thing that created the moment we're living through is really fundamentally shaped and driven by technology, not by decisions that were made in the boardrooms or editorial desks of media companies.
One thing is for sure. I mean, you've always been at the vanguard of what the audiences wanted, and you were able to deliver either at Politico or BuzzFeed or even now at Semafor, because you guys do a high quality journalism for your audiences. And now we're talking about how AI is going to change our business, journalism.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you guys are doing with AI that is helping with the production or the journalism or the reporting?
Yeah, it's funny because I think this is true of a lot of businesses right now, not just news businesses. Mostly we're finding kind of boring ways to save money. I think the single biggest and most obvious is that when you produce a podcast, the AI will produce a transcript and will help you edit it, which is just hours of really annoying work that it eliminates. If there are captions on this video on social media, the robots probably wrote them. And that's true in less valuable ways across the production of text too. Grammarly is an AI product that I think nobody's worried that Grammarly is going to be out Skynet style bombing cities, but these are real breakthroughs that essentially have changed kind of the shape of newsrooms. The main thing they've done is eliminate kind of junior and mid-level roles, moving copy around, doing production work. This is something that's been happening continuously since the end of, copy boys, where you type up your story and you'd yell copy and some kid would run and grab it. The sort of technological streamlining of newspaper production or news production has been going on a long time. But that's basically a super boring answer. I think, it's we're eliminating some costs and some junior jobs and hopefully investing that, in our case, certainly in hiring reporters. There's the question of are there either really terrifying or really valuable public facing things AI is going to do? I've seen people use those analytical tools for analyzing huge databases. I think that's been huge kind of bodies of data. That's obviously can be interesting. And there's certain kinds of stories, basically, where you want to find a needle in a haystack and the haystack and you can say, hey, go through this haystack and find this needle. That's a real useful thing. And then I just think, obviously, there's a lot of, very kind of, it's a quite strange moment just in the information ecosystem. I'm interviewing somebody on our podcast later today, and I had done a quick search of how she grew up, and the Google AI summary said she grew up in a dairy farm in Maryland. And so I wrote a question about that, and then I figured I'd check, and she did not grow up in a dairy farm in Maryland. That was totally made up. And so we're operating in this world where and I find myself doing this, where you're you look for a piece of information, you get a result, and you think, this is probably 80%, 90% likely to be accurate. And in this circumstance, that's good enough. I'll just operate with a kind of margin for error, really and that is obviously pretty disconcerting if you're in the business of trying to find accurate information.
I mean, at the same time, we've always worked with human error in journalism. So when they tried to make this thing about AI is full of mistakes, so we can always make the same mistakes without AI. I think, right? And
For sure.
I wanna turn into politics. You and I interviewed Zohran Mamdani back in January for the New York editorial board. I don't know if you remember what was your impression after he talked to us for like an hour and change? You came out thinking he's a real deal. He's just like his, proposals are not workable for a city like New York. He's a socialist. There's no way he's going to win the primary.
The thing first thing I remember is that we had because our this sort of community of journalists who do these interviews together in New York occasionally had kind of a discussion of who should we interview first. And it was like, oh, let's see if we can get Cuomo or Lander. Those are the two big name established people. And then who should we interview second? And I was like, I never heard of this guy. Like, not this guy. This doesn't make sense. And someone else on the editorial board was like, no, he's the real thing. And so we and persuaded us that he was a very serious candidate and brought him in. And I'd seen his social media that, I'm freezing the rant video where he jumps in the ocean was kind of like just catchy and fun. But had I not seen the social media, I think I would have thought, wow, like here's like a really smart, really young assemblyman, which is like a real kind of entry level job in New York politics, partly because the way Albany works, as you know, is that the leaders make all the decisions, and it's not even like the House of Representatives. Like the backbenchers have no power and are scrabbling around the edges for ways to have any kind of impact. And that he was smart, that he was on message, but I don't think he was still becoming like he was just like right in the process of becoming this figure that he 8 months later is, and I do think that board is full of people who are deeply, deeply knowledgeable on the wonky details of how to run the city. And he was getting asked questions that I certainly didn't know the answer to and didn't always really understand the question about, like, how do you plug holes in state budgeting and things like that. And he didn't pretend to know the answers. Like, he definitely was saying, well, that's why I'm going to hire people who are really expert, which on one hand is a pretty good answer. On the other hand, clearly he just the New York governance is like quite complex, and he doesn't, at least that time, didn't kind of know where all the parts of it were.
One of the main things of his job now, once he takes office in January, is going to be his relationship with the president. You know both. You know Mayor-elect Mamdani. You know President Donald Trump. Do you think that relationship is going to be better than we expect, or even worse than we are predicting?
I don't really know Donald Trump. I mean, I know him the way we all know him. Yeah, I think it'll probably be worse. Isn't everything worse? Isn't that like a good rule of thumb in the year 2025? Like, is this going to be more high conflict and apocalyptic than we expect? Probably. Although, who knows? I think Trump, I did a piece on Mamdani and Trump, and something people said to me, people around Trump said to me, is Trump kind of respects him in the sense that, game, respect game. And that, in a sense, populists share the view that the United States is a destroyed country where its elites have betrayed the people. Everyone is impoverished. That most people hate their lives and hate the government and think that, the thing is a sort of a step away from civil war and needs like absolutely radical solutions. And that is something Trump and Mamdani share. They differ, profoundly on what those solutions should be. But there is a shared diagnosis of kind of elite failure, incredible stress on most people. This kind of they're calling the affordability crisis that is so widely felt, even if, it's interesting, right? Like, you talk to an economist and they'll say, well, actually, like, real wages have outpaced inflation, but nobody wants to hear that, right? And so there is this kind of shared diagnosis, I think. And remember, Trump really spent a lot of time talking about grocery prices when he ran, and Mamdani had stayed very focused on that. So there, and I think, I think they're both pretty flexible in a way. Like, Mamdani doesn't come from the Donald Trump is a fascist wing of the party. He comes actually further left from that like Donald Trump is kind of like, the kind of classic product of capitalism and exactly what you would expect. And I do think that gives him a kind of flexibility in dealing with Trump that a more normal liberal politician wouldn't.
I spent the whole weekend thinking about what Tina Brown, the legendary editor, said on The Interview, the podcast from the New York Times, saying that Donald Trump is a great producer, a great television producer. And she's right. He's always surprising us with beating the news cycle. What is it, do you think? Is there anything that we still don't get about Donald Trump, us reporters, journalists, the media in general? Is he beating us at our own game?
We in the media?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I do think. Well, yeah, yes, he's absolutely beating us at our own game, and I agree. And I agree with you. He's a producer of content and is essentially broadcasting direct to his followers, and so a lot of the sort of commentary doesn't really, and analysis doesn't matter. That it matters less than it used to because he has this direct line, and and also I think has this ability that his enemies don't always see because I think when you're sort of really that scared of someone, it's hard to find them funny. But that he's like incredibly entertaining to people who like him, or just I don't know. I definitely find him occasionally incredibly entertaining. I don't know if you saw this thing last week where the new Syrian president who'd been a terrorist before his, before sort of pragmatically finding his way to being a U.S. ally, was in the Oval Office, and Trump presents him with Trump cologne, and then sprays the Trump cologne on him, and sprays it on himself, and sprays it on the interpreter, and then he says, "Best cologne," and the guy's kind of like playing along, and then he says he also has some Trump perfume, which is obviously the finest perfume for his wife, and then he says, "One wife." I mean, like, what are you gonna do? Like, it's the greatest show on earth.
I remember you covered the first Trump administration while you were still at BuzzFeed. Is there any mistakes that you like to, that you would have, that now you look back and say like, oh, I shouldn't have made that mistake, or I should do again what I did over there the first time because that's the way to really do a good job as a reporter covering the Trump administration.
And we covered Trump very aggressively at BuzzFeed from the start, and wrote a sort of legend. McKay Coppins wrote for us a legendary piece, I think in like 2012 when Trump was 2015 when Trump was thinking of running, that really captured his energy, but also was very dismissive, wrongly, about the prospect that he could be president. I would say a couple of things. One, I mean, the thing that probably is we were most known for at BuzzFeed was that we published the Steele dossier, which was this set of unverified allegations about Russian connivance around Trump and I've written and talked about this at length, that I think it was the right thing to publish in that moment. Like everybody, it was a document that CNN, among other things, that basically everyone in Washington had a copy, was talking about it, was using it to influence their decisions. But its existence and its substance were being kept from the public. And CNN at that point had reported that it existed and that it contained compromising information about the president, but wasn't going to show it to anyone, which I think is sort of an untenable position. And we published it, fully caveated, saying we didn't know if it was verified. I think we could have, among other things, like stamped those caveats on every page of the document. Not sure that would have helped, but might have been, because of course you publish an article saying this PDF in technical sense. Here's this article very soberly saying, hey, caveat emptor, we're not really sure what this thing is, but it's sort of this very important public document influencing policy, and then a PDF, and the PDF just takes off and goes in one direction and without any of the disclaimers. Then more broadly, I think we were like, or at least I was fairly skeptical of the most lurid claims about Trump and Russia. But I think the media in general, like the big mistake of 2016 was that Trump wins, and a lot of the East Coast media thinks this can't be right. He can't have actually won the election. There's got to be some kind of trick. And there are two possible culprits. One is Russia and one is Facebook. Like the more fun, complicated theories, weave them together. That's the Cambridge Analytica story.
Mm-hmm.
And that just didn't really turn out to be true. Like Russia really did intervene aggressively on Trump's behalf in the election. The WikiLeaks hack is one of the great intelligence operations of history. You could argue maybe that it marginally swayed the election. Who knows? But it does turn out that Trump is legitimately very popular, went and won another presidential election. And there was a real failure to reckon with that. And instead, in a way, this kind of grasping at straws that aren't, they're not totally unlike the idea that, the Chinese somehow stole 2020 for Biden. Like that's a kind of parody version of the Cambridge Analytica story. That sort of fascination with what must have been Trump or it must have been Russia, or it must have been Facebook. And we're going to kind of get to the bottom of what happened, of like how Trump tricked everyone, really just missed the larger story that he was part of a rising populist wave that won on the merits.
Let's talk about New York City, because you were born and raised here. You grew up on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. Now you live in Brooklyn. How do you see the city moving forward? I guess we are having this new mayor who is promising a lot of different things than we're used to when it comes to policy, when it comes to the way we look at specific things like even like grocery stores. How do you see New York moving forward?
I mean, I love New York and yeah, born and raised here. And I think one thing about New York that is, or then this political moment that I find energizing is that there's these very heated disputes across a very wide political spectrum from kind of the New York Post and the Manhattan Institute on one end to, the Democratic Socialists America and Mamdani on the other, of people who like really love cities and love New York. Because I think in national politics right now, the Republican Party kind of hates cities. Like there's a whole strand of Republicanism right now that is just anti-city. And that's not and it's there's something kind of nice in New York that you have like a full political spectrum. Curtis Sliwa, like whatever he is, these people who really, really love cities and love New York. And then it is, for all that it's this moment of great, I think, stress for a lot of people in New York, it's also boom times. And the city is incredibly vibrant. I mean, if you like post COVID, I think people still have this kind of like, particularly people who aren't here, have this kind of hangover of the city is like apocalyptic and abandoned and filled with zombies. And like the reality of New York right now is just like great. My wife is Latvian, and we had a distant relative staying with us for a few days, a woman who lives in Denmark and and she just spent like 3 days walking around New York City, and she's like, this is the most amazing place in the world, right? Like, and I do feel that too. And I do think so. There's a lot of possibility. I mean, I think, Liz Hoffman wrote recently for us at Semafor about how, for all the sort of eternal talk that the big banks, that Wall Street, that the finance industry is going to leave New York, there's just zero indication that that's going to happen. And in fact, the biggest bets they're making are these very, very long-term real estate investments. In fact, JP Morgan just put up this massive, like American flag draped tower monument to capitalism right next to Grand Central that opened a couple months ago. Like they're not going anywhere. And so I don't know. I think it's a moment of a lot of possibility. I guess I just hope that sorry, you can cut me off. I have a lot of theories. But I think there are kind of two paths for New York in like a really big picture way. And one is that it becomes kind of like Paris is a great city. But the thing that French people say about Paris is that it's a gilded museum.
Mm-hmm.
It's free, it's a museum of what the 19th century was like. And if you want to go see what like the most beautiful city of the 19th century, you can go to Paris and like have croissants and look at these beautiful buildings, these boulevards. And that's what the 19th century was like. And I think the likeliest case for New York right now is that it's a museum of the 20th century. Like Manhattan is really spiffy, and Rockefeller Center, which I think like Rob Spire did like an incredible job in Rockefeller Center, which was kind of run down and boring when I was coming up, at least. You would go and you'd go to some NBC thing and you'd feel like you were like visiting the battleship Intrepid, like some decommissioned, falling apart thing. Rockefeller Center is now amazing. And if you sort of really get a sense of like, wow, like the American century was amazing. But I think if we're not careful, we're probably on track just to kind of stop there. And the new stuff that's been built like is fine. Like Hudson Yards is fine, but it's not. If you want to see something like Hudson Yards but really big, you can go to Dubai. And so I guess I think that there's this question of like, do we just kind of settle into being a museum of the 20th century? Or do we say like, hey, like there's like so much more to build. This city should have a population of 20 million. Like, how do we really grow? And that I asked a bunch of the candidates, the editorial board, if they thought New York should again have the largest building in the world, which some of them said. I thought that was a good idea.
Got it. And do you think we've been a little unfair to Eric Adams, given how the city it is today compared to 4 years ago when he came into office? The mayor, at the end of the day, sure, there was a corruption case and then the association with Donald Trump. But is Eric Adams a better mayor than we have given him credit for?
I mean, I think that's definitely a real argument. I mean, that on the sort of the most important issues that face the mayor, I'd put education first. Like he really did fix the reading curriculum in a pretty meaningful way. He passed City of Yes to allow more housing to be built, and crime is down. So like those are three pretty big boxes. I do think that I do think because he was pretty absent for chunks of the mayoralty for various reasons. He never really seemed like he got his like hands on the machine heavy machinery. He first brought in a bunch of cronies and then he pushed them out, turned it over to technocrats. And you do leave with this sense of like, this place kind of runs itself. Like there's a lot to complain about in the sort of bureaucracy, but also there are a lot of incredibly smart, hardworking civil servants who do seem to keep things running pretty well. And when you compare New York to other cities in America, like a lot better. Like the New York City schools are better, the public schools, which there are lots of things wrong with them, are better than the public schools in many other American cities. The police department, again, many things wrong with it, is better trained, less brutal, more efficient, higher tech than most big city American police departments. And so I think I actually I would like to give him more credit, but I kind of think it's a tribute to the extent to which the place will just kind of run itself, but without a lot of vision and direction.
Ben, tell me, because you're constantly reading and listening to stuff and watching stuff. Is there any podcast that recently has surprised you, or a new one that you started listening to recently?
Well, I love the Juan Manuel Benitez show. That's among my favorites. No,
Thank you.
I would say I think there is this like little ecosystem of New York City podcasts that I'm very excited about and love. There's FAQ is one. Roberto Perez has one. My wife Leanna Zagari and Nicole Jelinas have one, and I think it's like Jamie Rubin has one that's very good, and I think there's like Ben Max has one. Like there's just like nice little. I do think that there is the beginnings of an ecosystem developing that hopefully will fill in some of this just like missing empty space of civic life in New York City.
And is there a book you're reading right now that you would recommend?
Yeah, I'm reading George Packer's new novel. It's just called The Emergency, and it's a novel about the collapse of an empire.
Why do you like it?
It's obviously trying to grapple with the challenges of the United States right now, but through the lens of kind of a metaphorical fictional place.
And you were talking about New York City earlier and all those wonderful places in the city. Is there one that you think deserves landmark status and it hasn't gotten it yet? One corner
Huh.
of the city that you love?
Gosh, they're literally trying to landmark my corner right now. Like I just got a notice from the landmark board in Ditmas Park. And it is like I live in like I really love my home, but it is not architecturally distinguished. And it is like across the street from a school and next to a bodega. And it should not. And I actually think like I wrote them a letter, which I hope somebody will be mad at me about, saying that they should probably not forbid building more housing on this site in the long term. So no, I don't think we need more landmarking.
No more. Okay. Okay. And you're, if I may say, you're this guy with always big ideas. You're always thinking about what's next, what's the next big idea in media, journalism. What is your next big idea?
Oh, most all of my ideas are going into Semafor these days. I think we feel like we're in the very, very early days of building a big competitive global news organization, and just so excited about the possibilities and just getting started.
And is there any trend that you see right now in journalism that everybody should be following?
I think the obvious answer here is the kind of journalists becoming their own multi-platform brands and having podcasts and stories and all of that stuff, which is, painfully obvious. And also, I think, sometimes kind of annoying. I would say that a sort of anti-trend when people ask me about journalism is that even as like, I think there's so much uncertainty around just if you are a journalist, and even if you have a job, where will people read or consume your work? Like, is it going to be the web? Well, the web's kind of going away. Maybe apps, but maybe AI is going to disrupt apps. Email, like for now, email is great, but who knows what happens with email in the future. But on the other hand, I don't think scoops are going away. Great reporting, journalists. Like, I feel pretty confident that somewhat regardless of what surface this all lives on, there's a lot of demand for accurate information delivered by people who, have a lot of expertise. So that's a positive trend.
Yeah, if you had my journalism students in front of you, all of them are getting all these negative news about the industry. Everybody who talks to them tend to be really pessimistic about the future of the industry. What will you tell them?
It's like, if you like doing it, it's just the best job, right? Like my grandfather always said, beats working for a living. And I think that and journalists have been complaining accurately about the collapse of our industry, like since you and I started, for sure. But it's not universal gloom and doom. It's that some very, very like vital civic institutions, particularly in local media, really are in huge trouble. I think other parts of journalism are really thriving. And I would say right now, this is an era where the business press is really thriving, and that the kind of entry-level jobs that used to be at, for me, the Indianapolis Star are now often at trade publications, and that there are a lot of good ones, and that people shouldn't be snobs about them, and that if you can get a beat reporting job covering the waste management industry or something like that, like that's awesome, and you'll break a ton of news and learn a lot about an important part of the world, and that people should be, I think those are actually the most fun, interesting jobs right now, covering, some part of the bond market or some industry that you hadn't thought about before, for a publication that's serving people who really, really care what you write.
I guess the industry hasn't changed that much, because I started my career at a trade publication.
Really? Which one?
Hispanic Market Weekly. It doesn't exist anymore.
So it was written for people selling into Hispanic consumers?
Yes. It was all about the media, advertising industry, marketing towards Latino Americans. Yeah.
Well, you put that to good use. Look at you marketing your podcast.
Anyway, Ben Smith, editor-in-chief of Semafor. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks, Juan Manuel. See you soon.
That's it for this episode of Juan Manuel Benitez Wants to Know. You can find me on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Substack. Follow, leave a review, write a comment. That's it for today. In New York City, I'm Juan Manuel Benitez.